open up a screen. Um, let's see. So Daniel 11 part 5, which is kind of like we're doing Daniel 11, but we're actually kind of doing side by side. We're actually covering a lot of the historical stuff that from Israel's point of view, the Maccabean revolt and stuff like that. We're actually going to be talking about the Maccabees themselves today and the beginning of that revolt, starting with Judas Maccabees and how they start defeating the Antiochus Epiphanes and his armies. So here's actually a painting of Judas Maccabees pursuing Timotheus. It's actually another name for Timothy. And that's one of Antiochus Epiphanes' generals. So I dug a little bit more art out today. Well, yeah. So it came from Maccabees. I think means like hammer or something like that. But I think there was a guy named Mattathias, and he started a rebellion against Antiochus Epiphanes to fight for Jerusalem, and then he fought for a year but died, and he left the fight to his sons, and it was led by one of his sons named Judas Maccabeus, and so the whole books of Maccabees are named after them. It's not like and so kind of like the heroes in that book also get kind of referred to as Maccabees, but they weren't part of the Maccabean family or anything. Yeah, it'd be So, but the book of Maccabees is it became the Maccabean revolt, and so then it's kind of like then it became like a general thing for like people who were part of the Maccabean movement, but it refers mostly to the family who led the rebellion. So let me see if I can kind of summarize where we've gone just from this, and then we'll kind of like go through the next slides really quickly because it's just a kind of a recap and catch up of where we're going. So Daniel 11 goes through several centuries in its prophecies, and so from where Daniel is. And his time would be from King Cyrus in the Persian Empire, and so the word is given to him that there's going to be several more kings, and that the fourth one, who's going to turn out to be Xerxes, is going to be stronger than and richer than all of the rest. But what he does actually is that he starts fighting the Greeks. And like if you watch the movie 300, he's out there and fighting the Spartans. Well, the Greeks weren't united yet, and so like he could kind of fight them, like fight the Spartans, fight these guys. But it wasn't until Alexander the Great united Greeks and fought back really, and then took over Persia. And then he not only took over Persia, but a whole swath of area going all the way into India. I forget, three something, like early threes. So and so when he dies, he doesn't really have a successor. So the kingdom goes to his generals, and it ends up being broken up into 4 kingdoms, which is under Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. The rest of the prophecy just deals really with Seleucus and the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and the reason and it's called the kings of the north and the kings of the south. So the kings of the south would be centered in Egypt. In the north, they're going to be their headquarters would be Antioch. So Antiochus gets his name from, or Antioch gets his name from the Antiochuses, right? So this is up in Syria, and down in the south in Egypt, you have Ptolemy, Yeah, here's the Sinai Peninsula, but of course, Jerusalem's right here in between. So what happens is that this area right here, Joppa is the main port in this area, and everything from Africa, from this part of Africa, is being transported from here. Everything from Asia is coming through there. The ocean it's marshy over here, and there's really rough traveling if you port anywhere up in Egypt. And up here, it's very rocky, and there's a lot of cliffs. So the best place to port would be in Joppa and do your trade in Jerusalem. So they kept on fighting, and then over that area, and sometimes they would make agreements, and sometimes they give one of their daughters in marriage. You have the first Cleopatras that come from that kind of arrangement. So I think some of the Seleucids would like give their marriage, like Cleopatra this one and Cleopatra this one. They end up down in Egypt, and there's all these agreements. But when you get to Antiochus, he does something. Well, I'm going to call him just Antiochus from now on, but he's number 4, Antiochus IV, and he is going to do what his fathers haven't done, and that is that he's not only going to try to take over the area of Jerusalem and Israel, but he's actually going to try to take over the south as well. So he goes down into Egypt, and he kind of has them on a leash. Later, what happens is that the Ptolemies, they start allying themselves with Rome. Rome is up and coming at this time, and then Antiochus Epiphanes runs into trouble because he can't face Rome, and this all becomes part of the story of why he takes out his frustration on Israel. Now, there's illegitimate rulers and there's illegitimate priests in this scenario. First of all, Antiochus was not supposed to be the successor to the throne, because it was his brother who had ruled before him. His brother's heirs would have been his sons, but one was young and one was in prison. So Antiochus weaseled his way to the throne, supposedly standing in the way in the stead of the older brother, and so he's like, "Oh, I'll rule for him," but he had no intention of giving it up. So he kind of weaseled his way in there. And then there was another guy named Heliodorus who, if you remember, he's the guy who gets kicked down by the horse and gets whipped by the angels, right? Hey, Frank, what's up?
Hey guys.
Frank.
Hey. Big Craig's on the way.
Oh,
right.
Yeah,
So Heliodorus.
what's up? Hey,
Yeah, you don't.
And he told me about it. I'm like, oh man,
Pretty soon
we're go check it out.
Hey, pretty soon we're just gonna all live in together. Like,
Huh?
pretty soon
I
we're all
lost you, Mark.
coffee together. 'Cause we see each other. So
What happened? He said pretty soon we're gonna
this
move
week it was like
Lost the sound.
Oh no, it's Frankie just walked in, so we're all just kind of like hanging out. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, Heliodorus, that's the one where you have that. I showed you guys that painting of that tax collector guy who tries to take money out of the temple and gets knocked by the horses and everything. And in Maccabees, he's actually kind of he has his come to God moment. But he actually tries to seize the throne. Hey, how you doing? What's up, Greg?
What's up, man?
Thank you.
So
I know, man.
So we're already online, and we're already kind of like in the study right now. So yeah, I'm already recording. So I'm gonna. So he kind of seizes the throne, and of the younger brother. So what happens is that Antiochus Epiphanes is being held prison in Rome, and Heliodorus is kind of ruling around in Jerusalem, but Antiochus gets out, and then he intimidates Heliodorus. Here, Heliodorus can't stand up to Antiochus, and so he flees. But these guys were all illegitimate, So now on the Jerusalem side, you have illegitimate priests. So what happened was that Onias is a good priest, and Onias was legitimate, and he was also very pious. He was the one who was ruling ruling the priesthood. He was the high priest when Heliodorus tried to take that money, and Onias said, "No, I can't give it to you because we set that money aside for orphans and widows and people donated to the temple in good faith that it would be used for something other than be collected by some tax collector, and he wouldn't do it. So he's not only pious, but he's also very brave, Well, he has this brother named Jason, and Jason wants to rule on he wants to rule by becoming high priest, basically. So what he does is he bribes Antiochus for the high priest position. And Antiochus basically has the legitimate high priest removed and puts Jason, his brother, in his stead. And what Jason does is says, in the deal, he says, we'll make Jerusalem Hellenized. We'll put up a gymnasium in honor to Zeus, and we'll become citizens of Antioch, and so he completely corrupts Jerusalem, and a bunch of the priests leave their posts and they become secularized, they become Hellenized, and so the majority of the city probably is not even like serving God anymore.
And then a lot of the Jews are still in Babylon, right?
Yeah, they're kind of spread out all over the place. But this is Jerusalem. This is from the group that came back from Babylon. So this is years later, but they are they are the children's children of the people who came back from Babylon. And then there's another brother. His name's Menelaus, and he gives an even bigger bribe to Antiochus, and so Antiochus has Jason removed, and now you've got like Menelaus, and he even in order to pay this bribe, he actually robs the temple. He commissions some guy to loot the temple, and like so that he's paying off Antiochus, and he's paying off these other people and everything. And Onias, who's kind of in hiding, hears about this. He's the legitimate high priest, and he raises a big protest about it. And in order to shut him up, Menelaus has him killed. So you have the legitimate high priest being killed by some guy who's not even supposed to be there.
The guy that he removed, did he kill him or just?
Yeah. So so Menelaus is the second guy. So you had the first guy come in to have Onias removed. He asked Antiochus to remove. And then the second guy, Menelaus, comes in, has Jason removed. And now Menelaus, no, he hasn't killed Jason yet. And what happens is that Jason later on hears a rumor that Antiochus is down in Egypt and that he's died. So then Jason gets the big idea. Well, now's my chance to regain the high priesthood by attacking Menelaus, right? Antiochus hears about this from Egypt. He hears news about this from Egypt. Huh?
He's like, wasn't he one of like the most wicked men up to?
Yeah, Antiochus.
So far?
Yeah, Antiochus is like the most wicked of the
worse than Hitler.
Well, he was the worst definitely of like these Greek rulers. So we're in chapter 11 here. So Jason attacks Menelaus thinking that Antiochus is dead. Antiochus hears about it, but what he thinks is going on is that there's a rebellion in Jerusalem that is now like that they're rebelling against him. Okay, so he's like, Jason is like trying to take the throne, it's just like, wait a minute, I'm not running the show there anymore. I got to go up there and fix things. So he's like, these people are rebellious, and that's what brings him to first attack Jerusalem. That attack against Jerusalem isn't a random thing that Antiochus did. It's intertwined with corruption in Jerusalem itself. And the way that the Jews are seeing this is that if we had been true to our God, as in the time when that guy came to try to get our taxes and then was met by this rider on a horse and the three angels who thrash him to within an inch of his life, the same thing would have happened to Antiochus Epiphanes if we'd have been serving God at the time. And so when you read Paul and he says, you know, like about the coming, you know, Antichrist, he says, we know that the apostasy will happen first because things like this don't just happen in a vacuum. That's always been, that's the thing that, that's always the thing that's in the background. God protects the people, you know, as the community as a whole, when they're being faithful. You start being corrupt and everything, you end up with a remnant who's true to God, but the system goes. It's just what happened with Jerusalem the first time around when they got taken into exile. It wasn't just out of nowhere that you know, Nebuchadnezzar was able to overthrow Jerusalem. It was tied to the idea that you know, Jerusalem, that God's spirit had actually taken off out of the temple and said, you know, I'm done over here for now. You know, I'll be with you in exile, but you know, I'm handing you over right now. So this is God handing them over.
Which happened to them over and over.
Which happened to them over and over. Yeah, it's always, God's judgment is always about him handing his people, who would be his people, over. You know, it's the God deals with the you know, Jerusalem first in chastisement, but then he retaliates against Nebuchadnezzar. He brings down those who have attacked God's people. So here's a painting actually of you know, Antiochus Epiphanes when he comes into Jerusalem, and he's going to come in kind of like two waves. First, he's going to take a bunch of articles and the menorah and the bunch of the riches from the temple, and then there's something that's actually going to trigger a second wave. What triggers a second wave is what verse 29 and 30 are about. At the appointed time, he shall return and come into the south. So he goes back down into Egypt, okay? But it shall not be this time as it was before. First time he kind of like took charge in Egypt. But what happens is that ships from Kittim, which means Cyprus, the nation of Cyprus, shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw. What happens is that in the south, in the meantime, the Ptolemies had sided with the Romans, and they called the Romans for help. And so these ambassadors from Rome came from Cyprus, met him down in Egypt, and said, if you start a war with these Ptolemies, you're fighting us. So you got to decide whether you want to fight us and them, or if you want to just withdraw right now. And so this guy, this ambassador, he draws a line in the sand around Antiochus, and he says, you're not going to leave here. You're not stepping out of that circle until you give us your answer. In other words, step out of that circle and don't give us an answer, we'll kill you right now. And so Antiochus is, this is where we get the term draw a line in the sand. Yeah, it's from this event.
So he's stretching himself like way too thin.
Yeah, he's gotten way ahead of himself, and now he's got the Romans to deal with. The Romans are not as big of a deal as they're going to be, but they're becoming very powerful at this point. So he's completely humiliated. So it says here in verse 30, and he shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay no attention, or pay attention and have an understanding with those who forsake the holy covenant. So this is what that means. Antiochus, he's dejected and furious. He's going to take it out in Jerusalem, but he would have an understanding with the people who've been Hellenized there and who are playing, you know, they're playing Greek citizen, you know, and so he actually ends up getting a lot of help. There's a lot of Jews that ended up attacking their own people because they sided with Antiochus. And so he has an understanding with that portion of the Jews who had abandoned Judaism and had embraced Hellenization. So many pro-Seleucid Jews attacked their own people.
So this is Daniel.
So this is when he killed like 40,000 Jews or something.
There was, Maccabees records like 80,000 or something at the end of it. And I don't know. Yeah, this is, I think between the two of them, it's not clear from the Maccabees how many were killed from well, it's not clear to me how many were killed in the first wave and then how many people were killed in the second wave. It's a detail I don't know. And I think Josephus tells a slightly different story and has different numbers.
Yeah, I think Joseph says it's like 40,000 and 40,000.
40,000 and then 40,000 again.
Yeah.
Okay. So Francois Bardon, these are like two painters, French painters. I think this is about 1700s. They have this painting of the ransacking of Jerusalem, and of course here in the background's this guy at the being fried in a pan, and like we last time we read about like the Maccabean martyrs and how they were like chopping off these kids' hands and they killed all the 7 sons of that one woman, and they were crucifying women with like their babies around their necks and everything.
And who was doing this?
Antiochus. Antiochus.
So they were Greeks then.
Yeah. Well, Greek Empire. So Antiochus himself, I think, was kind of like from Syria. Yeah, and so that's actually going to be important later on. And sometimes you hear like, he's called the Syrian or something like that, because he's from the north. And I don't know if I don't think he was immediately from the Greek Isles or anything. And of course, here's an early, it's a Christian depiction of the Maccabean martyrs. This is Eleazar. Here's the woman and her 7 sons who were all killed. It's interesting. She's holding a cross. Yes, he's holding a cross. But these are probably some of the people that are mentioned in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. So if you read like the commentary on Hebrews 11 of like some were, they ran around destitute and they were tortured and this and that and the other. Most people have an understanding that these guys were kind of included in that scenario. Huh? Oh yeah, he's holding a cross too.
It's upside down.
Nah, but I think the idea is like, like they knew that, of course, reading it from last time, they definitely believed in a resurrection. So they have a hope in the resurrection for sure. And like one of the boys says, like you can cut off my arms, you can cut off my hands and everything, but I'll receive them back, because the implication is like, I'm going to be resurrected. So, go ahead and do what you're going to do. And all of these perish because they wouldn't eat pork.
That's why.
Yeah. So they stood up to they stood for their law up to the point of death. It wasn't just to them that was the same as denying God. Eleazar, they said, some of his friends said, hey, we'll sneak you some some kosher meat, or something. And he's like, no, because I'm going to mislead all the young people. And so he's like, and he starts walking to the gallows himself, like where he's going to be beaten to death. And he says, just send me to Hades, send me to the grave, because what am I going to do at 90 years old? At this point, deny my God, or mislead these young people. It's like, I'm not having it and I'm not doing it. Eleazar is going to come up again in this story. So we covered these verses last time, verses 31 through 35. It says, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up an abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. So the Hellenized people, they're going to be seduced by him. He's going to flatter them. And he's like, hey, I'll make you powerful and I'll give you this part of the city, and help me destroy these religious fanatics because we want them out of the way, right? But the people who know their God, including, these martyrs, they shall stand firm. And some of them are going to take action. We're going to read about the Maccabean revolt a little today, and they actually start fighting back. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. So not everybody who joined the Maccabean revolt had good intentions, especially once they started gaining some momentum. Some people were looking for loot and glory and other things. They're just like, well, these guys look like they're being pretty successful, let's join them. But they weren't as heroic as the people early on who were being killed in mass. When they stumble, they shall verse 35, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it awaits the appointed time. So it's like even some of the faithful are going to stumble, and they're going to be pushed past their breaking point, but it's also so that they're going to be refined. They're going to be made pure. There's going to be a refinement of those kinds of people. So here's the revolt of Judas Maccabeus. I think this is chapter 8 in 2nd Maccabees. It says, but Judas, who is also called Maccabeus, and his companions secretly entered the villages and summoned their kinsmen and enlisted those who had continued in the Jewish faith. And so they gathered about 6,000 men. They besought the Lord to look upon the people who were oppressed by all, and to have pity on the temple, which had been profaned by ungodly men, and to have mercy on the city which was being destroyed and about to be leveled to the ground, and to hearken to the blood that cries out to him. It's kind of like Abel, their blood cries out from the ground. And to remember also the lawless destruction of the innocent babies and the blasphemies committed against his name, and to show his hatred of evil. As soon as Maccabeus got his army organized, the Gentiles could not withstand him, for the wrath of the Lord had turned to mercy. Now, this took a while because, of course, his father had been at this for a year already. And so it took him a little while to build up his army. So it's skipping forward a little bit. Coming in without warning, he would set fires to town and villages. He captured strategic positions and put to flight not a few of the enemy. He found the nights most advantageous for such attacks, and talk of his valor spread everywhere. So he is fighting kind of a guerrilla warfare type of war here. He's not, these are like a ragtag bunch that are kind of engaging in guerrilla warfare to fight the power that be, right? So when Philip, he's a general, I think, one of Antiochus' leaders. When Philip saw that the man was gaining ground little by little, and that he was pushing ahead with more frequent successes, he wrote to Ptolemy, the government of Coelestra and Phoenicia, for aid to the king's government. And Ptolemy promptly appointed Nicanor, the son of Patroclus, one of the king's chief friends, and sent him in command of no fewer than 20,000 Gentiles of all nations to wipe out the whole race of Judea. So this is kind of sounding like Esther, right? We're just going to wipe out all the Jews. And so Nicanor becomes like the big general here. They got 20,000, they're going to fight 6,000. He associated with him Gorgias, a general and a man of experience in military service. Nicanor determined to make up for the king the tribute due to the Romans, 2,000 talents, by selling the captured Jews into slavery. So I don't know how that's supposed to be that he's going to wipe all of them out or kill them all. So they're either going to end up being dead or being put into slavery. And he immediately sent to the cities on the seacoast, inviting them to buy Jewish slaves and promising to hand over 90 slaves for a talent, not expecting the judgment from the Almighty that was about to overtake him. So he's actually collecting their money ahead of time because he's like, I'm going to bring you a bunch of slaves. This is how like sure, like Nicanor is that he's going to take these guys, right? So he takes the money with him and he goes to basically collect a bunch of slaves and kill everybody else. So word came to Judas concerning Nicanor's invasion. And when he told his companions of the arrival of the army, those who were cowardly and distrustful of God's justice ran off and got away. Once they hear, 20,000 guys, okay, I'm out of here. So others sold all their remaining property and at the same time besought the Lord to rescue those who had been sold by the ungodly Nicanor before he ever met them. It's like we've been sold as slaves before we've ever seen this guy. So they start they start seeking God, if not for their own sake, yet for the sake of the covenants made with their fathers. So it's kind of like, hey, remember your covenant with your people. It's that theme again, And because he had called them by his holy and glorious name, same reasoning kind of like Moses has, it's for your name's sake, what are the people going to think of you if all of us are destroyed? But Maccabeus gathered his men together to the number of 6,000 and exhorted them not to be frightened by the enemy and not to fear the great multitude of Gentiles who were wickedly coming against them, but to fight nobly, keeping before their eyes the lawless outrage which the Gentiles had committed against the holy place and the torture of the derided city, and besides the overthrow of their ancestral way of life. For they trust to arms and acts of daring, he said, but we trust in the Almighty God, who is able with a single nod to strike down those who are coming against us and even the whole world. Moreover, he told them of the times when help came to their ancestors, both the time of Sennacherib when 185,000 perished. So this is that stories in 2 Kings where one angel at night kills 185,000. It was Hezekiah. Yeah, Hezekiah calls on Isaiah and Isaiah prophesies to him and everything, and they never even did anything. This angel just goes to the Sennacherib's army and just takes 185,000 out, just like overnight kills 185,000. And the time of the battle with the Galatians that took place in Babylonia, when 8,000 in all went into the affair with 4,000 Macedonians. And when the Macedonians were hard pressed, the 8,000, by the help that came to them from heaven, destroyed 120,000 and took much booty. I actually don't know what that's about. We're all like 15 years old here.
Booty's the spoil for more.
The spoils for you.
Booty's spoiled.
That's not why Steve laughed.
I was laughing at something else. Yeah. So Judas defeats Nicanor. With these words, he filled them with good courage and made them ready to die for their laws and their country. And he divided his army into 4 parts. He appointed his brothers also, Simon and Joseph and Jonathan, each to command a division, putting 1,500 men under each. Besides, he appointed Eleazar to read aloud from the holy book, and gave the watchword, God's help. Then, so they have this watchword, God's help. Then leading the first division himself, he joined battle with Nicanor. This is interesting here, because it's like, is Eleazar is the name of that first martyr, the guy the old man, right? Who would, well, yeah, because I was thinking, is he already dead, or is he killed after this point, or is there another guy named Eleazar, or is this somebody, So this,
Is that one of the sons of Aaron? Are those-
no, I'm talking about like this is Eleazar, like this is like,
Way after.
this is like 160 BC. So yeah, this is right, kind of like later Greek era, like where the Romans have already started, like appearing on the horizon. So so I'm thinking, is this the same Eleazar who died for his faith, in the Maccabean martyr thing, which is a couple chapters before this, so I don't know how that works out, but anyway, here's there's this, so he defeats Nicanor, but there's still this guy named Timothy. Okay, so this is Gustave Dore is a French artist. He did this thing of Judas Maccabees facing Nicanor's army. There's all these elephants and everything. If you it's kind of like a yeah, facing a bunch of elephants and everything.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, right? An Oliphant. So with the Almighty as their ally, they slew more than 9,000 of the enemy, so almost half of them, and wounded and disabled most of Nicanor's army and forced them all to flee. I like this part. They captured the money of those who had come to buy them as slaves. Yeah, they got their own slave money, like they got that too,
They got more booty. out of
Yeah,
it.
got more booty out of it.
Didn't Booty start with Abraham and Melchizedek?
Uh,
They went after Lot. Got Lot back.
yeah, like they're brought back the booty, and then gave a bunch of it to Melchizedek,
I'm sure that
Well, yeah.
that was going on.
What,
since
that
the
make-
first
Five.
Yeah. So it's kind of like an older English word, kind of. I don't know. So
Not like today.
So after pursuing them for some distance, so they start actually they have to like chase Nicanor away, right? After pursuing them for some distance, they were obliged to return because the hour was late. Oh, it's getting late. Let's. No, it's actually because the Sabbath is it's a Friday afternoon, right? For it was the day before the Sabbath, and for that reason they did not continue their pursuit. So it's going to be Sabbath as soon as nightfall hits.
Fight on the Sabbath?
Yeah, they weren't going to fight on the Sabbath.
Well, wouldn't that be advantageous for the enemy, right?
Yeah,
While
so
they're on the Sabbath.
this is something that the Maccabees doesn't talk about and might actually contradict a little bit with like Josephus, because Josephus had said that, the first time that the Antiochus's people took advantage of the Sabbath and attacked them. And then after that, they kind of said, we're not going to do that again. And they said it's actually appropriate for us to fight even on the Sabbath. Okay, doesn't record it that way here in Maccabees. So there's a couple conflicting accounts about it.
And I mean, maybe if the Antiochus was invading them on the Sabbath, they would still fight, but. since
Maybe,
they were
yeah.
chasing them off, it was like,
Yeah, they've already, they probably took it as like, well, we're chasing beyond the horizon now, and the Sabbath is here, and so like that's God's, we're gonna go celebrate that with the Sabbath now, and when they had collected the arms of the enemy and stripped them of their spoils, they kept the Sabbath, giving great praise and thanks to the Lord who had preserved them for that day and allotted it to them as the beginning of mercy. So I guess alternatively, like they may have been the first time they may have had their butts kicked on a Sabbath. Second time they go like on a Friday and they kill 9,000 and chase the rest away. And then now they're going to celebrate the Sabbath because they can, So after the Sabbath, they gave some of the spoils to those who had been tortured, and to the widows and to the orphans, and distributed the rest among themselves and their children. When they had done this, they made common supplication and besought the merciful Lord to be wholly reconciled with his servants. Here's this is the second group that he's going to go after. So first is Nicanor, and now he's going to pursue this guy named Timotheus in this. this whirling. So Judas defeats Timothy and Bacchides, I guess. In encounters with the forces of Timothy and Bacchides, they killed more than 20,000 of them. So they take 9,000 of Nicanors, but they get 20,000 of the Timothy and Bacchides. And they got possession of some exceedingly high strongholds, and they divided very much plunder, giving to those who had been tortured, and to the orphans and widows, and also to the aged shares equal to their own. So they didn't keep any more than they gave away. Collecting the arms of the enemy, they stored them all carefully in strategic places and carried the rest of the spoils to Jerusalem. They killed the commander of Timothy's forces, a most unholy man, and one who had greatly troubled the Jews. While they were celebrating the victory in the city of their fathers, they burned those who had set fire to the sacred gates. Callisthenes and some others who had fled into one little house, so these received their proper recompense for their impiety. The thrice accursed Nicanor, who had brought the 1,000 merchants to buy the Jews. So I guess what he had done is that he'd actually brought the merchants with him, and he was going to. So that's how they had the money there. Having been humbled with the help of the Lord by opponents, whom he regarded as of the least account, took off his splendid uniform and made his way alone like a runaway slave. So he was going to try to capture slaves, but now he's running away like a runaway slave without his splendid uniform across the country. Huh?
Kind of like undercover without.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's that turnaround sort of thing that you have, like you were going to be made a slave, but now you look like a slave running, it's like the tables have turned, and now kind of more of that kind of like storytelling like you have in Esther. Now the tables have turned, and now he's going to hang from the gallows that he made himself. It's like that they end up with the prize booty, just kind of like their slave money instead of being sold as slaves themselves. Thus, he who had undertaken to secure the tribute for the Romans by the capture of the people of Jerusalem proclaimed that the Jews had a defender, and that therefore the Jews were invulnerable because they followed the laws ordained by him. I missed this sentence. He runs like a runaway slave across the country till he reached Antioch, having succeeded chiefly in the destruction of his own army. So here's a Rubens painting. I think this one may have been at the Getty Museum when I was there. And it's Antiochus Epiphanes. This is in Versailles, I think.
Which one is him?
This is Judas Maccabees. Sorry, this is not Antiochus. This is
very Roman looking armor.
Yeah, right.
Probably someone to do.
Yeah, it is. He probably took Nicanor's fine apparel, his splendid uniform. So anyway, we'll jump back into Daniel for a few verses. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Now here you get into a part, really getting into a part where you have sort of a division between people who think, where it's suddenly without warning that this has jumped into something future. Okay. And then others who are going, why would it do this? It's probably all about Antiochus himself. I kind of take a third approach where it's like all of it's about Antiochus, but it's also about informing us about something that's going to happen in the future. It's kind of already happened, but not yet. That's why Jesus. So I'm going to show you both ends of the view, and then maybe talk a little bit about like how I see it for now, not married to any of these ideas.
They was talking about which king he's referring to, basically.
Yeah, well, so the king shall do as he wills. Now, here's the problem that people have. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. That's what people would say, well, does that really apply to Antiochus? Because, he was making, sacrifices to Jupiter and, and he had gods, he was a pagan, right? I think that I found one guy who's got Barnes. I like his arguments. And then I've got another website that kind of tells you a little bit of the typical way that I kind of grew up with, I guess. So it says, he shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods, which also isn't necessarily recorded where Antiochus says, well, I don't know, does he say something against Yahweh? He sure acts against Yahweh. So he shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. So here's Barnes' take on it. Okay. He says concerning, he'll exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. That is by directing what God should or should not be worshipped. In other words, he's telling people, you have to worship these gods or I'll kill you, attempting to displace the claim of all those who were worshipped as gods at his pleasure and establishing the worship of other gods in their place. Thus, he assumed the right to determine what God should be worshipped in Jerusalem, abolishing the worship of Jehovah and setting up that of Jupiter Olympius in the stead. And so throughout his whole dominion, by a proclamation, he forbade the worship of any god but his. One who assumes or claims the right to forbid the adoration of any particular god and to order divine homage to be rendered to anyone which he chooses exalts himself above the gods, as he is in this way denies the right which they must be supposed to claim to prescribe their own worship. Barnes got some old, difficult language here, but he's basically saying he's putting himself in, above these gods by telling everybody who they need to worship or not. And during word.com, I don't know who the particular author is, but they make this point. They say, we know that everything about this prophecy was not fulfilled during the career of Antiochus Epiphanes. So they're taking that approach. Jesus specifically said that the real abomination of desolation was still in the future. And you can look up that on the Olivet Discourse. The Apostle Paul paraphrased Daniel 11:36 in reference to the coming Antichrist. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshiped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So for Paul, it's a future thing. And for Jesus, it's a future thing. The Luke version of the Olivet Discourse doesn't say the abomination that causes desolation. It says, when you see the city surrounded by armies, if you're in Jerusalem, get out of there and run to the hills, right? What he's talking about is AD 70. So AD 70 is in that mix of these things happening, because that's also future for Paul. So the preterists will say that this is all about AD 70. I don't think it's all about AD 70. I think AD 70 is another type, just like Antiochus is a type of something. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that these things cannot be applied to Antiochus. I actually kind of disagree with it. I think that Antiochus is a type of this, but he's a pointer. One of the reasons that I was going so much into Maccabees and everything is to get a feel of like what happened in Antiochus's day and how the Jews experienced it, because it's going to clue you in for any future coming Antichrist, what the situation's like. All of these events, first of all, like I had mentioned before, have something to do with apostasy. Antiochus Epiphanes did not do what he did in a vacuum. This is God handing an unfaithful people over. And that's what's going to happen with yeah, like watch out, So verse 34, he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by women. Some versions have, or the desire of women. So some people think, oh, the Antichrist is going to be gay or something like that, right? So, but the wording is very difficult, and scholars have argued about like the language in this. It's very difficult to get after exactly what this means in the first place. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. So here's one thing that Barnes would say, okay? Antiochus did not, so he paid no attention to the gods of his fathers. Antiochus grew up with different gods than the ones he started pushing on the Jews. It was, Antiochus was exposed to gods like Jupiter when he was in captivity in Rome, but it's not what he grew up with. And so he was pushing the gods of Hellenization, but it wasn't the gods of his personal fathers. It wasn't his culture. So the desire of women. So Barnes says he's kind of pictures Antiochus. He was a licentious person, right? Like he liked a lot of women and everything, and he had sex whenever he wanted to and all that. But he didn't show any respect for women, and so Barnes sees it that, like he's actually more of like a woman hater than and he kind of describes men that are like this. He says, no one will expect piety towards God to be found in the bosom that sees nothing to interest him in the sympathies and the virtues of the femme mind, and the character of a woman hater and a God hater and a hater of God will uniformly be found united in the same person. Show me a woman hater, I'll also show you a God hater. So some people say, well, this isn't about Antiochus, it's about a future guy who's going to be gay and not really be into. It's some of the arguments. Yeah.
It could be the Antichrist.
Yeah. Right. So one beloved by women, some people have thought that he's referring to a god that he's not respecting any god, including the gods or goddesses that the women were into, like Tammuz or some of the other goddesses who were like heroes to the women back in, for the pagan women. Yeah, Semiramis, probably not Semiramis by this time, maybe. And then some of them are saying, that like the one beloved by women is the Messiah, because it was like, in other words, the seed of the woman, like the hope of women. So he's not going to regard Christ. So I don't know. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but put it in your back pocket. So he shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. So in practice, Antiochus, all he cared about was power, right? Whatever God he, quote, honored, he honored the God of power, or Mars or Ares, like there were gods of power and war and everything. And he built a temple to Jupiter and lavished it with the things mentioned above, but he didn't grow up. He didn't grow up with Jupiter as a god. Finally, he shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. So some people think a foreign god, so they think this is an Antichrist figure in the future who's going to be Jewish, a gay Jewish man who ignores anything, that's kind of like the view of like the future Antichrist. That's that view. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor, he shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. So Barnes's take on this is that the idea is that he would carry on his purposes against these places under the auspices of a strange god. So he's going to, like he's going, I'm doing this in the name of Jupiter, but he doesn't really care about Jupiter. He didn't grow up with Jupiter. It was a fact that in his wars, Antiochus came into possession of the strong places or the fortified towns of the nations which he attacked. So he attacked like all these fortresses, which would be Jerusalem, Sidon, Pelusium, Memphis, and then other strong places in the world. And with a strange god, a foreign god whom his fathers did not acknowledge, that is the God whom he had adored at Rome while he was in captivity, and those whose worship he was ambitious to transfer to his own empire, the Jupiter of the capital. He seemed to be acting under the auspices of this foreign god. So I'm going to stop there because we're going longer than I thought we would. But yeah, so there's the rest of the chapter, and we'll finish pretty soon with the chapter, because the last part of it, I think, can just be a summary of Antiochus Epiphanes' entire career. I don't think that there's really necessarily a contradiction between any that Daniel 11's about and what Antiochus Epiphanes' career is like. So but next time we'll see how Antiochus Epiphanes dies, and also how the rededication of the temple, and which is going to be later be celebrated as the feast of dedication, which Christ participated in, and later Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is about the success of the Maccabean revolt and the rededication of the temple.
How many more chapters are there?
In Daniel, there's one more, and we will probably get through that last chapter like in one shot, just like we did with chapter 10.
11 here, it's kind of like, you think it's about Antiochus, and then it seems like it veers off to be prophesying about the Antichrist, and then it comes back to Antiochus.
Well, I don't think that it's like all of a sudden jumps to like the future and then without warning and then kind of jumps back to Antiochus. I don't think that's not my opinion. Okay. My opinion is that the whole thing is about Antiochus, but because Jesus used it as in the future, and Paul uses it the same language in the future, whatever you learn about Antiochus and this whole thing that happened tells you about what's going to happen. Something about that is going to definitely rhyme with what's ahead. So that's why I've been kind of like, okay, let me slow down on chapter 11, because I want to see this whole thing. Last times I've gone through Daniel 11, it's like, oh, and then this guy and this guy and this happened and this happened, and yeah, but I'm kind of like, but I was like, I've never really read the Maccabees. I don't even know like Josephus's point of view on it, but like let me see what to the Jewish people. This is a big deal. This was a big deal in their culture, and I mean Hanukkah is a big deal, and what is it about it that like I'm not really seeing here? So that's kind of like, at least for me, I wanted to see if the future Antichrist is going to reflect what happened in this time, then I kind of want to know what happened then.
Was this the period of history that the dreidel was introduced?
I don't know where the dreidel comes from. I don't
know that they weren't allowed to worship, so they had to teach.
Right.
So they used that as kind of like a device where you might have a word. So
I don't know. I don't know anything. I don't know anything about the celebration of Hanukkah, really.
Frank just said too. What does Antiochus sound like?
What do you mean?
well, it's the Antichrist against.
Oh, Antiochus, Antichrist,
Wherever you see it, it's always
Antichrist.
Or what was the other one in place of?
Oh,
Like, it's like-
yeah.
Against Christ, it started out with, Enron, Tower Tower.
It's interesting, it sounds kind of similar.
Yeah.
Started out.
In structure to Antichrist and Titus, it's not that far off.
No.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that it's instead of just being for me, instead of just being focused on what the Antichrist is going to be like, I also am like interested in what allows somebody like Antiochus Epiphanes to do what he does. I don't know how long he lived. I think he was defeated like in 163 BC.
Like, you mean, what's the climate like?
Oh, no, how many years?
I don't know how many. I don't know how many years.
What's the climate in, like?
Yeah, what was the climate in Israel? Like, like you can be like, well, it's instead of being focused just on Nebuchadnezzar and how powerful and what he did. Well, what was going on in Israel that God handed him over to, to Nebuchadnezzar? So what I've never really heard discussed much is, well, what happened around Antiochus's time that allowed God to do what he did to Jerusalem at that time? Yeah, well, that's the big part of it. It was their idol worship, and them is the corruption from within.
Simple lust in the flesh.
Well, what? Yeah, yeah. So in Maccabees, for example, it says had Antiochus says basically Antiochus could not have done what he did if the Jewish people had been true to their God. What happened to Menelaus or to what's his name? Heliodorus. Whatever happened to Heliodorus would have happened to Antiochus. He would have been kicked by the same horse and whipped by the same angels. Basically, he got his butt kicked. Is because Ananias was a real high priest and true to his God, and so were the people overall. But it wasn't until they had been lured into Hellenization and worshiping other gods that any of this was allowed to happen. So God maintained and kept his people, in miraculous situations. Even that story that Josephus had of Alexander the Great marching into Jerusalem with intentions on flattening the place, and then when he sees they hear he's coming. This isn't just Josephus's story, right? Then they hear that Alexander is like mad and that he's coming because they are not playing along with what he wants. And so when he rolls into Jerusalem, though, they've all been prayed up. They've been like seeking God, and the whole city, went into prayer. And then the high priest had a dream, and he says, "Get up, put on all your priestly garments, and go meet him out. Go out and meet him." So when Alexander the Great sees them, he's like, "I saw this guy in a dream. I saw this very guy this very high priest in a dream, and I saw him wearing the same clothes. And in that dream, when I think he was in Macedonia, he says, I was told that by this God, the God who these people worship, that he was going to enable me to conquer all this territory. And he goes, and it's by this God that I was able to do all of this." And so he actually honors Yahweh and even gives some presents, and then he moves on or whatever. So God not only saves Jerusalem's, and not because Jerusalem's powerful.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah.
It
It was always God that
It's like
kept
the
them,
Revelation.
right? Yeah.
I mean, in the tribulation, gonna be, they're gonna be, 2/3 are gonna be wiped out. They're just gonna be so outnumbered by what, 200 billion, 200 million, it's millions of it from every corner of the earth. They're all coming against him, and there's no Berkeley hope that's when Christ comes.
Yeah, and they're surrounded, you know, it's like, and so I think for us, the application is always, you know, like, what are God's people doing, you know, and what, you know, what's the community that should be the community of faith doing? And if they're corrupting from within, then it's it's always God handing over people to the judgment. It's not,
It's
it's,
based on, like, cause if my people.
yeah, if my people, if, yeah,
My name. So,
Yeah.
Deal.
Yeah.
It's in the early and latter rains.
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's always in, like, I was just curious, you know, what was the church doing during, you know, not, when Nazis were coming out?
Some fought against it and some ignored it.
The organized church was doing nothing. They were protecting their power, their building. In fact, both Catholic and Protestant church in Germany wrote letters of, I have these letters. They're just like, they're letters of repentance. Basically, looking back and saying that, you know, and it's just like a short little thing, but man, to read it and then to think about where we're at today, like, I just think of in the face, you know, of abortion that we just watched happen. You know, it's like people go back and forth. Well, we shouldn't be involved politically, but I'm talking about evil. You know, evil is going on. Do we, you know, what? I mean, when you look back at Germany in their situation, they're probably thinking, well, we don't want to, you know, get involved politically and stuff like that, while they're massacring, you know.
During that time, Hitler and his ministers being military leaders, had set up a statewide religion where they took Christianity and really twisted it, and then took it so far away from it. There were Christians who stood up against it. They got treated pretty much the same as the Jews did.
Yeah,
You know,
there was movements.
yeah, I mean, so it wasn't, you know, but like you said, the organized, no, but see, if we look at the organized churches of today, without offending anybody, the Catholic Church, it seemed pretty far away from what was originally intended as it started. You know, your saints that you revere, praying to Mary. It's all symptoms of the disease.
Yeah, when I read that though, I'm not thinking so much out there. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of what, you know, what do I need to do? Because I can't change
What
anyone
did
else.
Jesus say? He says, when I come back, shall I find the truth?
Yeah.
What they
All this is symptom of the time.
A lot of it too, it's like what you were saying before, like a lot of the kings, it's interesting, I'm reading through Second Kings right now. And it says, oh, and he served God and followed after David's heart, but he didn't remove all the high places. And it seems like appeasing, like maybe he himself was serving God, but he was kind of appease the people. Like, okay, we'll let them still worship their God. And so they did all, it seems like, to me, I think it's kind of political, like with all the different kings, like a lot of the kings of Judea, they actually served God, but they still let the other people have their high places. And I think a lot of times we get like that too, like, well, I try not to, but a lot of the Christians, like, they don't agree, but they're like, oh, well, we don't want to fight over it. Like, and the enemy keeps getting more and more ground.
And then also,
So let's take a look at America right now and the things that are happening that you might say we are in the same predicament as they are, unless God's people get on their knees and pray and touch the throne of grace on a continual basis, we're going to be in the same boat.
yeah. I think the first thing that should come to our mind is our repentance.
Mhm.
You know, yeah,
I agree.
day by. I mean, you know, like we gotta we could seek out God's mercy and repentance just for our own lives, just based on like
Mm.
the way we live our lives, at least for me, you know.
It's part of like one of the
but-
fingers because it's such a-
Yeah, because I can be like,
Right?
look at the way America's going and look at these people and what are they doing and everything, you know, it's kind of like, what am I gonna do about this? And maybe there's some things I can do, you know, like, but you know, activism or something. But that's all secondary to, I think, personal repentance.
So, and the
You know.
thing is too, is
Yeah.
that we're looking at ourselves, but we can't change people that aren't Christians, for one. But I think there's been a big kind of uprising, the demand for purity within the church, at least I've seen like lately, like even in the men's, like kind of people, like we can look at ourselves as in the church. And at least, I think it seems like to me, guys have been talking to lately on more of a personal level, there's like a real resurgence in like a striving for purity kind of.
Yeah,
That a few years ago, like say the struggle with pornography, like a few years ago. I'm meeting, I feel like I'm talking to more and more guys that are having victory over it, kind of.
Mhm.
Or like it's more important to them now to have victory over it.
Another thing is that I was, that, you know, like. So many times, it's like these, if, you know, if my quote conviction aligns with my benefit. Right, like if someone says, you know, no, that, you know, whatever it is, you know, my church is right, the way they do this, but, you know, at that church, I have, you know, I have a retirement, or my job, or whatever it is, I'm gonna defend the thing that I benefit from. Like, you know, in World War II, if I was, you know, if I made lampshades, right, I might not want to stop, you know, it's, never mind, you guys don't get that. They made lampshades out of it, you know,
Try anyway.
they made lampshades out of the skin with the Jews.
Mm.
So like if I made lampshades, right, in that time as a German, you know, I'm like, well, I'm benefiting from their suffering,
Or
right?
like, yeah, I make
Yeah.
munitions or something.
Yeah, like what, you know, or yeah, you make munitions or something, so you kind of want the thing to go on, and it's so important, like you said, to deal with our own hearts.
Mhm.
Because when we deal with our own hearts, it strips away our selfishness, you know, the Bible divides between, you know, right and wrong in our hearts.
Yeah, it's just like,
It's where your treasure is, otherwise you store the treasure in heaven.
go ahead, John.
you know, it's just like last night where Jack Hibbs had a program and he brought people in from all the different kinds of what? Different kinds of works, where some were in the music field, some were in the helping people field, whatever. And it went on for about an hour or so. And the biggest thing that came out of it was we need to get on our knees and pray that God will bring this country back to the way it should be, and to bring that conviction on people that they will knock off the stuff that they're doing. And right now we have people that don't want to even come close to getting on their knees and praying for God's blessing on this country. Because if we don't, the other side's going to take it over and we're going to be left behind. And I think it's a important deal is to pray, that God get a hold of this place and make it see where we need to get right with Him in everything that we do and say. And some people don't want to face it.
Mm.
But if we don't, we're going to lose out.
I kind of like what John is saying, because this country are going away from our Judeo-Christian values of our forefathers that left this country so great. And there's that scripture, 2 Chronicles 7, where it says, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I would hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and heal their land.
Mhm.
That's in Second Chronicles.
But have we gone too far down the road? I mean, I don't think there's any mistakes in God's eyes. He knows what he's doing. He's taking us down the road. I believe the end is so close that you look at the way the rest of the world is and how it's just narrowed in. It just goes right through Revelation, what it's saying, the great falling away and, just that
Yeah.
the United States is not mentioned anywhere in Revelation, but all these other countries that are in war and all
Yeah,
the
there's
Eastern
Babylon.
nations.
Yes, it's Revelation 10.
Oh, I know.
Babylon,
Well,
Yeah,
where they,
that's-
where all the merchants cried out.
yeah,
But, well, I think that, but that has nothing to do with what we personally choose. And I think on top of like being repentant and, preparing our hearts, we need to do what God has called us to do in whatever capacity that is. It's different for all of us in his strength and with all of our might, with all of our strength and without fear.
no, I agree with
Speak out the truth. We've been so intimidated. Really, I mean, righteous. They've suppressed the righteous voice.
They have.
You know,
It was amazing at work. I was working for the city of Long Beach. And we would often have talks. I'd go around and tell people about Jesus. I didn't care. You know what I mean? I figured God protect me so far to protect me over this. And I found so many believers, people who profess to be believers, I believe them, but they were scared to talk. Because that's the narrative of today,
Yeah.
And I even
I
had,
think a lot of it is that we need to repent of our lack of motivation to get out and tell people about Christ. And sometimes we go, but sometimes we don't. On the whole, I would say a lot of people are not reaching out and trying to get in touch with what God has for us to go forth.
yeah, I think Mark and several of the other gentlemen are right. I think that in order for us to change this nation that we live in, we have to change ourselves first.
Yep.
We can't take accountability for, say, our sons and our daughters, or fathers and mothers, because that's not our responsibility.
Mhm.
If we can only make the place better one person at a time. And that one person would be us. But by us doing it, if we do it where visibly and are consistent, others will see it, and then that will want to change also. And we might encourage others by doing so.
Nothing is a better testimony or argument than people's actual personal change.
I
people-
agree.
I used to always try to argue with people about like scientific proof and theology and all this historical stuff, but I tell kind of people now, and I'm like, man, you can go to the men's meeting and meet probably 100 guys that within the last few years were addicted or homeless or
how we used to be.
all this stuff, and they're changed,
yeah.
and they all attribute it to Jesus and God. So I'm like,
Mm.
Yeah, there's no, what do you say?
you can't argue with that. Yeah.
It's like I was saying, man, it's like people. It's
Yeah,
like
it's-
dope. It advertises itself. That's how people.
I think it's like anything else that by our example, they see that we're different and that God is working through us if we allow him to. And especially, being in the military and things like that, hey, you got a captive audience. And as you bring forth and as you live it in front of them, then they start asking questions or they see that you're different and they
That's
can
that
stop you.
part.
I've had guys, when I was working at the base that he says, I know you're religious, can you pray for me? He had a medical problem. And yeah, right there. And I said, no problem, right now, let's pray. And pray for him right then that God would touch the deal that's in his head, that it's been tearing him apart. And it's something that from what I gather, as I still in contact with him every so often, that it made a difference in his life. And it's just simply saying, pray for me. You got it this way.
I'm gonna change the subject slightly. Some of you may remember this, my wife reminded me of it. When we were back on Sausalito, we used to end each meeting by everybody taking each other's hands, and we sing a simple little song, and I finally remembered the last of the words. It was
Jesus.
well, that's the very last word. It was the bringing, together we are bringing a living Jesus to a dying world. For where his hands, where his feet, where his voice, and we will speak his name to the nation, Jesus.
Mhm.
It was just a simple little fun thing that we did. I mean, look how long ago that's been. You know,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
I like that they put that back up in the foyer when you're entering on the. I don't know if it's on both sides, but it says bringing living Jesus to a dying world.
Mhm.
We kind of lost that. A lot of the newer people didn't know that that was the. Kind of the mission.
Mhm.
That was the
statement.
mission statement.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested personally too, to run into some of my non-Christian friends that I haven't seen in like a year or two.
Mhm.
And, just to.
Pay them back,
To what?
pay them back.
No, to not. Oh, nothing to pay them back. Just let them see like a difference in me too, you know?
People know if it's genuine or not by what you do and how you act.
Mhm.
And if they've seen you before and now they see you now, and there's a difference, they know something happened. And that's where you can start giving the gospel to them by telling them what Christ has done in your life to change you.
Yeah, I always say you have to get rid of your old friends, that when you get the Lord, your old friends don't really want to have nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
All the people who do drugs and alcohol and run around stuff, they're just like, never existed.
I don't know, sometimes old friends have also had their changes. Speaking of a fellow I went to junior high school and high school with. He lives in New York now. And he has his own struggles that he faces, but he's basically a Christian now. So just kind of neat how God works.
Mhm.
Pretty soon I'll be going to my 40th anniversary, 40th reunion. I haven't been to a reunion yet. I don't really want to go because, but it'll be interesting.
Where is that?
Jordan High School
Okay. Wow.
What, here?
in Long Beach. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one of the guys on Monday night that's a teacher.
Not the LA Jordan.
You're a
But no.
Panther. It's Long Beach, yeah, it's Long Beach.
Huh?
Panther.
Yeah.
That should have looked a lot different back then.
I was skinny. I had hair.